Hi, third graders. Today we are going to review multiplication and division stories. So this information is going to be new for you. We did this, sorry, not new for you. This information is going to be review for you because we did do this in class several times before we had to close schools. So I wanted to refresh your memory on the different types of stories that we use multiplication and division to solve, and also how we can decide if we need to multiply or divide. So let's start by reviewing the types of stories. We have area stories and array stories, and then we also have equal groups and repeated addition subtraction, which I will go over next. So an area story is a story where you are trying to figure out the amount of space covered by a rectangular object. So you'll have keywords like length, width, centimeter, inches, feet, yards, miles, square. Also, whenever you're trying to figure out how much space is covered by something or how many equal size things you will need to fill a space. Those are area stories. Okay. Now, array stories are a little different. Your keyword here is arranged. Array and arranged kind of sound alike. So array means physical objects arranged into rows and columns. And the way I usually describe it is physical objects arranged into equal rows. So when you hear that word rows, it's probably an array story. So some words you might hear: rows, columns, lines, shelves, stacks, arranged. Those words will tell you that this is probably an array story. Okay, so now, sorry, I'm moving my picture around so it's not in the way. Let's go back. There we go. Let's talk about equal size groups stories. Now, you may have heard them called like size groups. You may have heard them called equal groups. It's all the same thing. Whenever you have a certain number of groups and you have the same number of things in each group, that's an equal groups story problem. One way to think about it is an equal number of items inside holders, like a cup or a bucket, or the holder could actually be a person if you gave a certain number of things to each person. So the keywords would be groups, in each, per, some kind of item, equal, and same. So this down here is showing you a picture of an equal group story. There are three groups represented by those three circles, and there are three lines in each circle. So it's 3 times 3. And the last type of multiplication and division story is repeated addition or subtraction. And this is a harder one to describe. Repeated addition is like a get more that happens over and over and over again. Whereas repeated subtraction is like a takeaway that happens over and over and over again. So it's an equal action that repeats itself over time. So if your story has to do something with the same number of things happening over a certain amount of days or a certain number of weeks, then that's probably repeated addition or repeated subtraction. So if it has days, if it has weeks, if it has months or times, probably repeated addition or subtraction. So that would be represented by a number line. It can be represented by a number line where, say, you run 5 miles a day for 4 days. So that'd be 5 miles, 5 miles, 5 miles, 5 miles, 5 times 4. So 5 miles a day for 4 days. So you can see how that is something that is happening over time. Okay, so now let's focus on area stories. So when you multiply to solve an area story is when you're trying to find the total area. So you know the lengths of the sides, but you don't know the total area. In that case, you would multiply to find the total area. So the side length times the side length that you know is going to equal the total area. But sometimes you might divide in an area story. And if that happens, that's because you need to find the length of one of the sides. So you know the total area and you know one of the side lengths, but you don't know the other side length. That's an area story where you're going to divide. So it's the same story. It's what you're trying to find out that tells you if you need to multiply or divide. So if you're trying to find the total area, you're going to multiply. But if you're trying to find the length of one of the sides, you will divide. So here's a couple of examples. Oops, I think I may have clicked too far. Oh, okay. Well, we'll start with multiply. So here's an example of an area story where you multiply. Mario's desk is 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. How many square feet does Mario's desk cover? This is a multiply area story because I know one side, I know the other side. I don't know the total area. The question is how many square feet. And so I know I need to multiply. Now this one here is the same story, but where I'm going to use division to solve. Mario's desk covers 6 square feet. If his desk is 3 feet long, how many feet wide is his desk? So in this case, I know the total area. I know one of the side lengths, 3, and I'm trying to find the other side length. So same story, but one is written where you need to multiply and one is written where you need to divide. So let's move on to array stories. In a multiplication array story, you're trying to find the total number of objects. So you know how many rows there are and you know how many are in each row. You're trying to find the total. So in that case, you know the rows times the objects per row and you're trying to find the total. Or it could be the other way around. You could know the objects per row times the rows equals the total. Okay? But sometimes in an array story, you might need to divide. And that's when you're trying to either find the number of rows or you're trying to find the number of objects per row. So in this case, you know the total and you know one of these things. Either you know the total and the number of rows or you know the total and the number per row. And so this is the way your equation would look. Total divided by the number of rows equals the number of things per row, or total divided by the number of things per row equals the number of rows. Okay, that's a lot of words there. Let's look at some examples. I think that will be more helpful. So here is an array story where you multiply. The Lego store has 4 rows of Lego sets with 5 sets in each row. How many Lego sets are there in all? So you're multiplying because you're trying to find the total number of Lego sets. Now here's the same story, but where you would divide. The Lego store has 20 Lego sets arranged into 4 equal rows. How many sets are in each row? So in this case, you know the total and you know how many rows there are, but you don't know how many are in each row. So for this one, you would need to divide. Okay, let's move on to equal groups stories. So let's start with multiplication. You multiply to find the total number of objects. So in this case, you know how many groups there are and you know how many are in each group. And what you're trying to find is the total. So your multiplication equation would look something like this. The number of groups times the number of objects per group equals the total. Or it could be the other way around. The number of objects per group times the number of groups equals the total. Either way, when you multiply, you're trying to find the total. Now, sometimes you might divide in an equal group story, and this is what that would look like. You're trying to find the number of groups, or you're trying to find the number of objects per group. And in this case, for both of these situations, you know the total, and then you also either know the number of groups or you know the number per group. So your division equation would look like this. Total divided by the number of groups, and you would find out the number in each group, or total divided by the number in each group, and that would give you the number of groups. So both of these are division. So here's a couple examples, and it'll hopefully make more sense. Peyton has 3 cats. She gave each cat 7 treats. How many treats did she hand out in all? This is a multiplication story because there's 3 cats. They each get 7 things. And what we're trying to figure out is how many she handed out in all. So since we're trying to find the total, we're going to multiply. Now here's that same story, but written as a division story. Peyton handed out 21 treats to her 3 cats. If each cat got the same number of treats, how many treats did each cat get? Now, if you were in my class, you might remember that when I said when you hear the word each in a story, you're probably either going to multiply or divide, right? So in this case, you know the total. You know she handed out 21 treats total, and you know she gave the same number to 3 cats. So what you're trying to figure out is how many each cat got. Same story, but this one you are going to divide to solve. You would divide 21 divided by 3. Okay, Last story type is repeated addition or subtraction. Those were long words, and so I just used the symbols here. This means addition or subtraction. Um, let's see what the multiplication version of it is. When you multiply in this type of story, you're trying to find the total number of something. So you know how many times it was added, and you know how many were added each time. I know that sounds really vague, but when you hear the example, I think it will make more sense. So the multiplication equation would be one of two ways. The number of things that were added each time times the number of times they were added, and that's going to give you the total. Or the other way around, the number of times something was added times the number of things per time. So let me just give you a quick example because that one sounds really confusing. Let's say I ate 5 M&Ms every day for 5 days. So the number of things is 5 because that's my 5 M&Ms, and the number of times that I did it is 5 because it was 5 days. So that'd be 5 times 5. So it's the number of things per time times the number of times that happens. I know. It's a lot of words. It's very confusing. Hopefully it's making a little bit of sense. So let's see what this looks like as a division story. In a division repeated addition subtraction, you're going to find the number of times that something was added or subtracted, or you're going to find the number of things that were added or subtracted each time. So in this case, you know the total and you know the number of times that something was added or subtracted, or you know the total and you know the number that was added or subtracted each time. Okay, so your equations would look like this. Oops, sorry, that menu came up. The total divided by the number of times it was added or subtracted equals the number added or subtracted each time. Or the total divided by the number that was added or subtracted each time equals the number of times it was added or subtracted. Ugh, that's a lot of words. Okay, so let's look at some examples. I promise that will make a little more sense. So multiplication, repeated addition. Joey read 20 pages each night for 4 nights. How many pages did he read altogether? This is repeated addition because it's happening over time and he's doing the same thing for a certain number of times. In this case, he's reading 20 pages each night for 4 nights. So it's like 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 20, or 20 times 4. And what you're trying to find out is how many pages he read altogether. That's why you multiply. Now here's the same story, but written as a division problem. Joey read 80 pages of his book. If he read 20 pages each night, how many nights did he read? So in this case, you know he did 20 pages every night, and when he was done, he had read 80 pages. You're trying to figure out how many times was 20 added in order to get to 80. So that would be 80 divided by the number of nights equals 20, or 80 divided by 20. Okay? All right, thank you for listening and reviewing this with me. Your assignment today is in page 17 of your packet, or it may also be in your teacher's Google Classroom. And what you're going to be doing is reading a story, deciding if you need to multiply or divide, and then you're going to write the equation and write the answer with a label. All right, class, thanks for listening. Have a great rest of your day.